Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablin.
Hello, and welcome to episode 48 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This episode of the Queen City Music Podcast is sponsored by Middlesea Jazz, Charlotte's premier jazz club located at 300 South Brevard Street in Uptown Charlotte. Stop in for Thursday night jazz jams, gospel Sundays every third Sunday of the month, or bi-weekly Wednesdays for Remember Wednesdays. But if you prefer, stay in for the evening and watch their Saturday night live stream, where you'll have access to the best performances Middlesea Jazz has to offer. And if you want the VIP treatment, get a Baby Grand membership, where life takes you to a higher note. Tickets are now available for Dion Yates, Quintastic on September 10th and 11th, Paul Taylor and Michael Linkton on September 17th and 18th, and let's not forget Julian Vaughn's Chapter of Love Tour on September 24th. This month on the QCMP, I'm speaking with Joni Deutsch, the host of WFAE's Amplifier, a music podcast which shines a light on the artists who call the city of Charlotte home. In 2019, Amplifier was named Best Podcast by Charlotte Magazine and has also received a local Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Innovation. Joni's been working in public radio and podcasting for over a decade, and last year, despite the pandemic, she led the Charlotte Podcast Festival, the city's first podcast festival designed to inform, enrich, and inspire audio storytellers and podcasters. Joni Deutsch, welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast.
Matthew, thanks for inviting me, sir.
Wow, so how does it feel to have the tables flipped on you?
You know, it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, I'm so appreciative for people that know how to be a great host like yourself, because you're going to make it very easy on me.
I don't know. I have to be a little rough. So let's go to the first question. Are you originally from the Charlotte area?
I am not. I am from Charleston, West Virginia, not Charleston, South Carolina, or Charleston, Western Virginia. I'm from Charleston, West Virginia, born and raised there.
Okay.
Fourth generation on my dad's side, I believe. So I got some deep roots in the Mountain State. But yeah, originally from there, and I moved to Charlotte about 4 years ago, this fall, 2021.
So what brought you?
A couple things. I should say this at the very start. My boyfriend at the time was down here in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. He'd moved down here before me. I'd been visiting him and seeing the city and was really into the idea of coming down here to Charlotte, but was waiting on the opportunity. So he inspired me to move to Charlotte. And then what really cemented that move was the fact that I was offered a job at WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
Oh, wow.
So that helped me say, okay, I can move for the boyfriend. I can move for the job. The boyfriend has become a husband. The job has become my life for the 4 years. So I think it all worked out well.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like you, I moved here not for my own. When I was looking for a teaching position years ago, I was looking out west. I wanted to move I had a job interview in Arizona. So I almost moved to Arizona, but then a friend of mine was moving from Florida here with him and his family. And he said, hey, have you thought about Charlotte? And I said, no, why would I think about Charlotte? Not that it was a bad place. No, I love it. I love it. But because I didn't know anybody in Charlotte, so there was no reason for me to even come down here.
Yeah.
Not that I knew people in Arizona, but I had always wanted to go west. And I moved here because of him. And I owe it all to my friend that all the stuff that I do here in Charlotte musically is because of him. So it's been a good turn of events for me. So anyway, enough about me, but you. So you're one of those folks who shine a light, as it were, on the Charlotte music scene. Do you have a music background?
I do, but I don't talk about it very much because it's embarrassing.
Well, now you're on a podcast and you have to.
And that's why, I knew that this can of worms is going to be opened by someone. And it turns out it's Matthew. So I do have I even hate to say I have a music background. I do, for years I played piano, probably from the time that I was, maybe around 7 years old, all the way up until I was a preteen, junior high, high school age. But other than that, that was it. I didn't sing. I wasn't part of a choir. Mm-hmm. I didn't tour. I wasn't part of a band. I just did solo piano work. And I even hate to call myself a pianist because at this point I probably only know how to remember how to play Ode to Joy in a jazzy format. So yeah, But what I will say is that my grandfather was a saxophone player. My parents always had music going on when I was being raised, when I was growing up in West Virginia, whether we were in the car, whether we were at home. There is always some kind of music. And that was, usually 60s, 70s era. That was Phil Collins. That was Fleetwood Mac. That was Earth, Wind and Fire. We had some, 80s kind of synth going on. But yeah, I'm not a musician, and I definitely don't call myself that.
But you do have a background in it, and you do love it. I mean, it doesn't,
yes.
For anybody, if you love music enough, you can learn a heck of a lot just from your love of it. It doesn't mean you have to be playing all the time.
It's true. I've probably learned more about music by not playing music, which is not necessarily the route I would encourage others to go on. But for me, I gained a greater appreciation for music by, being able to really learn and listen to those that know how to play it and have the passion to play it over the years. And so part of the work that I do outside of WFAE is being an NPR music contributor, being able to write on, a range of people and music, musicalities from Bill Withers to Lizzo and Billie Eilish, and being able to kind of use my creative writing background to share what is it that relates those songs to the human condition and to the contemporary idea of what music is.
So since you brought it up, you are in the broadcasting field. Mm-hmm. How did you get involved in broadcasting?
Yeah. So growing up, I was not around people that were in radio. I was not raised around people who worked in media. So for me, I never considered a career in radio and audio and podcasting music discovery because I just never saw anyone that could share with me what that was like. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was, growing up, you're going to be a scientist, you're going to be a physician. So I did science camps growing up.
That was something you were interested in? You
yes,
liked science?
Very much so. I was a biology major in college. I was working in the biology department lab with the head of the department on metabolic syndrome on rats. And I named the rats after like Harry Potter and Hermione and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
You want to have a scar on his head?
I'm not going to answer that question. But no, seriously, I was doing all this biology research in my college years. But at the same time, I remember in my freshman year, I saw this campus notice, an announcement that said, hey, you want to be a DJ at our college radio station, which also was an NPR affiliate. Sign up, share a mixtape. Right. And that's your application. And I thought, well, I've always loved music. I've always loved radio and music discovery. And I love being able to share my love of music with others. Why don't I go ahead and do that? That'll be fun. Totally different from working on science and working in science. It's going to be a different part of my brain. And I did that. And I went from being the host of a weekly show called the DJ Joni Show, Friday nights at 10, where the listeners were basically my parents. Because who on a college campus would listen to a college radio show on a Friday night? Me and my parents and my dog. But no, I did that. And the station manager, Jeremy Franklin, saw that I loved doing it, even though I had no experience in radio. And he said, you know what? You're still here and you're reliable and you have passion for it. Why don't we make you the music director? You'll handle, the music that's coming in and out. And I stayed on long enough where he said, you know what, let's actually make a job. I will create a position, assistant general manager. It's yours. And I was like, I didn't know this was a path. I didn't know that this could be a career. And so by junior year, I was like, you know what? I feel like my passions have changed so drastically that I'm going to leave science alone. Everyone else can pick it up and I'm going to go into radio. And that's what I've done since then. It's been 10 years since I started my radio career and moved back to West Virginia after college, worked at the NPR station there, did a variety of roles from hosting All Things Considered locally there to having my own music program called A Change of Tune, which is still where all my social media handles are at. And yes. And also working with the NPR music program Mountain Stage, which is a long-standing program in public radio. It's one that is basically like Austin City Limits, but in a radio format. And that gave me so much experience in learning how to produce a show, work on live shows. And I was even able to guest host that show a couple times.
So when you got involved with it, was it a lot of it just on the job training, or did you actually go get a degree in broadcasting?
Yeah, no, a lot of it was on the ground, on the job training. It's the kind of thing that I was always the kind of person to say, hey, You tell me what time to be there. I will get up early. I will stay late. I will attend sessions and trainings. I'll talk to every department, any person I can about what they do and how they do it well. And, trust me, I'm going to learn how to do this. And that's what I did. I mean, I showed up early. I stayed late. And I'm really thankful for all the people that shared their knowledge with me over the years. Because, gosh, prior to 2010, if you'd put a microphone in front of me, you'd given me a soundboard, I wouldn't have known what to do.
Yeah.
And now I know a little bit. Now I know a tiny bit. But yeah, I will say that I did get my master's degree. My bachelor's and my master's degree are both based in communication. Okay. And so on that front, it's how can you be able to utilize your voice and utilize your skills to be able to communicate effectively. But the tech side, on the job training.
That's a lot of it, though. I mean, even for me doing music, you'd think I know all this tech stuff, but I mean, I'm looking at this mixing board and all this kind of stuff. Until I really started playing live, I had no need for it. And even when I started playing live, I let a friend of mine handle it for a while. And then finally I got my own and I was like, I got to learn how to do this, and figure this all out. So a lot of it is. And, the other interesting thing you're talking about, it's just your development into the field. And I'm going to say your success, because obviously you wouldn't be in the position you are right now if you weren't good at what you did. I can put that or extrapolate it into other fields too, because, and maybe you can let me know your opinion. Being successful is not just your talent in it, because I look at music and the music industry is littered with musicians who are super talented, but never did anything because they don't have the other aspects of their life together, their interpersonal relationship, their communication skills, the showing up on time or the showing up early. That seems to be tough for people. And I'd imagine in your line of work in broadcasting, it's the same thing.
Yep. It's so many elements. I mean, luck is one of them too. Sometimes you're just in the right time at the right place when they need someone and you're there and you're ready to go. That kind of happened with me getting this job in Charlotte. It just so happened that, there was an opening right there when I needed it and wanted to move to Charlotte. And I happened to be with the skill set to come in. But no, to your point, it is so based on relationships as well. It is not in the sense of you have to know the right person to get in the door. Yes, to a small degree, but really it's more the interpersonal relationship building so that, you're able to make the reputation for yourself that you are a good person, that you are a person that's going to bring ideas to the table, that you're easy to work with, that you're kind.
Yep.
Because reputations, you can talk to people behind the scenes and there's that little rumor mill of, or the whisper network of don't work with that person.
Yes.
They are an asshole. Don't work with that person. You mistreat their employees. So yeah, I would say it's being kind-hearted. It's being open to ideas, finding collaborators and working with the community and knowing what they need and being able to be there is that friend and colleague and luck. Just a lot of luck.
Yeah, I think when you see movies of people cut throat and all that, I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe there are some people who make it to the top and in their careers doing that, but I don't think that's the majority of people because nobody wants to be around people who are jerks.
Yes.
And I don't care what field you're in, you know? And in music, I've seen it, heard about it a bunch. There's people always say, I don't want to go on tour with this person, even if they're a better musician than this person, because they're a jerk. I'd rather take a less musician and somebody who's a good hang. And I'm sure in broadcasting that might even be the same because nobody wants to work with a diva or I guess that's diva.
Or an asshole. Or an asshole.
You said it, I didn't.
Because, there's so many bright and talented individuals that are wanting to get into media and they don't want a toxic work environment.
So can I ask, have you met any?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. I mean, I think if you don't meet those individuals along your way in radio and media and podcasting and music, then you're very, very lucky. Or you're in a small bubble that hasn't been able to see the wider scope. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely seen the people that have, taken advantage of others. I've seen events where it really makes you uncomfortable to be in the same room as them.
Right.
But yeah, all that to say that there's still so many great people that have made it a positive working environment, that have opened up opportunities for others, made space for their colleagues, and supported one another. So it's not anyone listening who's thinking, I want to work in radio, I want to work in podcasting and music. There is always space for you. There's always space for your voice and your ability and your creativity. And you can make that space, and you can also work with others to create a better and brighter space.
And I think that should be the goal. You have to go in no matter what you do, whether it's music, whether it's broadcasting, whether it's podcasting, whatever you're doing in whatever aspect, you have to go in with a positive vibe.
Yeah.
You can't go in with a negative vibe, because that's going to feed to everybody around you. And I think in the end result, nobody's going to want to be with you or around you and work with you if that's the kind of vibe that you give off.
Yep.
And hence probably won't be successful in that field.
Yeah. If we've learned anything from the Me Too movement, if we've learned anything from the past year with, the racial and civil reckoning that the country is going through, these scars can last a long time, and how people are mistreated or how people are taken advantage of. And this is an opportunity for us to be able to say, look, if something does happen, then we know who are the right people to work with, who are the people that, need to have some lessons, people that need to learn what they've done wrong and how they can become better people and learn from their mistakes.
Absolutely. Hey, I looked at your bio before you came on, and even listening to you talk about your history in broadcasting. Have you always had an interest in doing musical aspects? Because it looks like you've worked with a lot of production and even podcasting with music podcasts or music production in a sense.
Yeah.
So is that always what your point was? Even though you had a science background, shouldn't you have been doing some kind of science program?
You think so? You think that I could have been like the Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye of public radio at that point, after all those years of teenage science experiments. But now, it's funny. I've never considered working on science-related programs like Science Friday. For me, the gateway and the interest to radio and public radio came through music discovery, and especially local music discovery. I remember back in the early 2010s before I even, worked at my first radio station, I was downloading podcasts, like the lo-fi introductory podcast back in the day, because nowadays they're just so intense.
Wait, go back. How long ago?
Oh, this was early. So podcasting didn't really become a thing until 2014. So I was listening to podcasts in this would have been high school, early college. So around 2008, 2009, 2010.
Oh, you go back. I don't even, no.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Back then, podcasting was not a thing until 2014, when Serial, the true crime podcast, came up, and then everyone wanted to listen and make podcasts,
right.
Be better and brighter. But back in the day when I was listening, these podcasts were just simply the studio sessions and MP3s of the day in a podcast feed. And they came from public radio stations like KCRW in Los Angeles or KEXP in Seattle, Washington. And I loved listening to them because they gave me a broader sense of music and genres and tone. And coming from West Virginia, where, at the time that I was there wasn't really much infrastructure for a local music scene or state music scene. Those podcasts really opened my eyes to what other musicians in other places could make. So college radio was the same for me. Public radio was the same for me. It was those public radio stations I listened to their podcasts for that made me realize that, this is a really great medium. This is such a great platform, and a national platform with the NPR music branding and the Tiny Desk branding that could really bring these musicians of all types, of all neighborhoods and communities together and promote their work even further. So yeah, over the last 10 years, one of the hallmarks of my career has been, how can we get West Virginia's music scene on the map? How can we work with Charlotte musicians to get their music out even further than the 704 area code?
So when you got here, did you intend on doing a Charlotte music podcast, or were you going to kind of feel your way around and see what you wanted to do in the broadcasting?
So when I was in West Virginia, before I moved to Charlotte, I had done a West Virginia music podcast that focused on the different parts of the state music scene. Okay. Because, at the end of the day, West Virginia, you may think of it as Deliverance, the banjo music, which, fun fact, actually was done by a Charlotte musician.
Really?
Arthur Miller. Yeah. So, but with that said, you think of banjo music and you think of maybe Brad Paisley or maybe Bill Withers if you're in the know, but there's so much more to that. And so for a couple of years, I did that kind of podcast and series at West Virginia, and it worked really well. It got national acclaim. And when I was moving to Charlotte for this position at WFAE, which was not a title that was like music podcast host, it was simply podcast manager or podcast producer. They knew that I came from a music podcast background. They knew that I had done music programming. And a fun fact for the audience listening is that WFAE, years and years ago, was a jazz station. It did music, a lot of music. Over time, it became more and more of a news station to the point where it is today, 40 years later, that it is now basically all news with some small musical components in there. Sure. And so the station was thinking when I came in, hey, this could be a great opportunity, given how the traditional publications in the Charlotte area were kind of divesting they were taking away their music coverage components. The WFAE as a radio station could step up to say, hey, we're using our airwaves for local music. And so since I had the background, they said, Joni, you want to do it? And I said, sure. Let's take that formula from West Virginia, apply it to a city of Charlotte with many more musicians, many more genres. And we did it. And it's been running now. Amplifier, the music podcast I host for WFAE, has been running for 3-ish years. And it's done a lot. It's done a lot.
Yeah, you guys have. I've listened to quite a few. It's awesome.
Well, it's fun for me because as someone that was new to the city, and you probably did the same exact thing. When you move to a new city, you want to know what's happening. Right. And especially when it comes to the sounds of it. You know, what are the genres? What's the history of the music scene? And as someone that's brand new, I wanted to know more. And so this podcast has actually been a way for me to tour the city through sound. And I've met so many great people and collaborators and community leaders in the process. And seeing the city grow and seeing them grow along with it has been just such a wonderful experience.
You know, when I got here, I started doing the Queen City Music Podcast probably about 4 years ago. And there was nothing going on. And I don't want to say there wasn't. There was another podcast. I think we had spoke about it. What was it? The magazine, the local magazine was doing
Creative Loafing had one called Local Vibes.
Thank you. And I think that was the only one, but I don't think they were putting the output out because they were going through changes with that.
Right.
So when I did it, I said, all right, me being a musician in town, one, I didn't know a lot of people. I was gigging, so I didn't get to see a lot of people. So 3, how do I promote myself? So it's for me, it was a bit selfish. 1, I would get to meet other musicians and see what other people were doing. 2, I'd get to promote myself. And of course, 3, I'd get to spotlight other musicians and let other people in town know what's going on. And it's been real nice getting to know not only just musicians, but businesses and artisans who are involved in the scene, who make it. And now Amplifier's out. But the beautiful thing about Amplifier in my podcast is I think when I listen to you, I don't hear a lot of crossover. Like, we're not interviewing the same people all the time.
Right.
You know, I think recently maybe you had Reese Raps on, and Reese was on the other year with me.
Yep.
But it's not like we do it every week. We're like, hey, Joni's going to have this person on. Hey, Matt's going to have the same person on.
Right.
You know, it's different perspectives from different people, which is nice.
Yeah. And that's also too because the music scene here, and to your point, I feel like there are more artists that are coming to the city and growing their craft in the city, but also more than just musicians, because I should say that the music scene is more than just the people on stage. It's the people behind the scenes, the people that are creating space. And so the venues, the non-traditional, artists or producers, which, there's so many ways to be able to highlight their work. And for my show, which only runs twice a month, every other week, and your show, Matthew, which is once monthly. Yeah. If we had full-time teams, which, I mean, for everyone listening, you probably guessed it, that it is kind of a one-person operation for each of us. If we had more people, if we had more capability, we could do many more features, many more episodes. But yeah, to your point, I think that this is the different little communities that are having these podcasts made. We're able to highlight more because there are more of these podcasts in the community. Yeah, the podcasting situation has grown though in the last couple of years, especially in the last 2 years. Very much
besides
so.
You and me, I can think, and I can't name them all. I'll be awful, right off the top of my head, but I know of at least 3 other podcasts for the local music scene.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own little slant, which makes it fun. But the interesting thing about podcasting, it's blown up so much. And I don't know the man, but I think a lot of it has got to do with Joe Rogan, because all these folks are coming in thinking they're going to make money. And I don't know if they realize that this is not a scene where, I'm walking away and I'm making $1 million for my podcast, or you're making even more than that. I mean, it's,
If you know the finances that I don't, let me know, because I'm going to see where those zeros come in. No, as I mentioned earlier, podcasting became more and more of a thing in 2014. I teach classes on this. Like I love being able to share the knowledge of what it takes to be a podcaster and the technical ways and the historical ways. But,
right.
I'd say that, true crime podcasts like Serial and S-Town, they've made people want to get into podcasting.
Yes.
And become armchair detectives in that way. We have, the talk cast, the interview cast, the roundtable discussion podcasts like Joe Rogan or Pod Save America, or, NPR has a ton of them too. Pop Culture Happy Hour, NPR Politics Podcast. And we've had just a variety of celebrities come into the medium too.
Yes. People
that already have established audiences. And so they're able to utilize podcasting as another little outlet for them, and that makes people say, oh, they're a celebrity. They're making even more money. They're getting their voice out there, their face out there. I can do the same as someone who's not a celebrity.
Right.
It doesn't take a lot to make a podcast nowadays. You could use your phone. You can use your computer. You don't need to invest in, we're currently in a makeshift studio of sorts that has the equipment, but you don't need to invest in microphones right now. You could just do it on your phone, upload it for free, and the world can listen.
Well, I will say the quality has been upped, because before I got into podcasting, when I just started listening to it, there were a couple of podcasts. One was a music, guitar related podcast, and it was a wonderful podcast. I really liked listening to it. But as I got into podcasting more, sound quality became important to me. And this guy, he would record, I guess, off his iPhone, and he'd be in the car sometimes.
Yeah.
And you could hear the rain, or you could hear the clicking of the turning signal. And after a while, I was like, yeah, all right, this is just way too distracting. You need to have some kind of quality standard in what you're doing. I understand you want to get out the podcast, but you need to have a quality standard in what comes out.
Yeah. Look, when I talk to audiences and people that have never done podcasting but want to do this for the first time, I advise them. I say, look, you can do whatever you want the podcast. It's one of the most freeing, barrierless mediums out there.
Yeah.
Because you can do it on whatever equipment you want. Mm-hmm. You can do it on whatever frequency in the terms of you doing it on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, monthly basis. You can do it in any language you want and put it on any platform and do it on any budget.
Yeah.
If you have a ton of money to invest in it, or if you just want to do it for free or DIY right now. But at the end of the day, it's your goals. What are your goals for making a podcast?
Yeah.
Is it to make money and for this to be a full-time or part-time job?
Right.
Is it to promote your brand or your book or whatever you're doing, yourself as a person? Is it to connect communities? Is it to share a story that you don't think has been represented yet in a podcast or in any kind of medium or news feed? So knowing your budget, knowing who you are, knowing who your audience is, knowing your goals, all that is important at the get-go, because you've probably seen it over the years. Pod fade is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the concept that, if someone puts an episode out, they're so excited. They're like, yeah, I'm going to do 20 episodes the next 2 months. And then after 5 episodes, they're like, God, this takes too much work. I'm tired. I'm burnt out. That's when you see pod fade happen. And that's why a lot of podcasts out there's millions of podcasts. A good majority of them stop after episode 5.
Yeah.
Because people just are like, you know what, this isn't what I thought it would be. Yeah. I don't have my goals in mind. I don't have a timeline in mind. I'm going to give it up and do something else.
What's the average range? Is it like 6 months that most podcasts last? They don't last that long?
It's not very long. It's not very long. And you see, that's why, the dead podcast, quote unquote, where they haven't been updated in years. Yeah. They haven't been updated in a year. They gave up. And you don't really know what happened to them. There's not really a little this is the last episode. It's just... they fade away into the abyss.
I belong to a on Facebook podcast group, podcast movement. I don't know if you're on there.
Yes, in fact, they are the biggest podcast conference in the world.
Yes.
Their podcast conference takes place once a year. I actually was able to speak there it was 2 years ago before the pandemic. It was one of the last conferences I spoke at.
I think this one's in Texas somewhere.
It's in Nashville this year, 2021.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've been thinking about it. I'll see what happens. I don't want to get off track, because I also want to talk to you about what's going on here in Charlotte podcasting. But before we get into all that, oh my gosh, we're getting sidetracked. That's all right. I'm really curious. So we've talked about podcasting, yours and mine being a little bit different.
Yeah.
And then other people's different. is there a certain way being associated with NPR that you are expected to do the podcast, or is the feel and the sound of your podcast, is that all Joni Deutsch, or is it NPR says we need to make this to give it that NPR feel?
It's a good question. So the way it works with WFAE being an NPR member station is that we follow the NPR code of ethics when it comes to editorial integrity. So in terms of like, we don't give our questions in advance to our guests. We don't have it be like a collaborative effort in that sense. It's like we are the interviewer, you're coming in as a guest. We may ask you like, this is why we're inviting you over, but otherwise that's it. So certain elements of editorial integrity and the code of ethics are there, but the sound of it, the recording quality, the format, there's not a by the book requirement. There's not a handbook that says by being an NPR member station, you must have a podcast that is exactly 30 minutes long, that has an intro and outro, that has a theme song, that does this. And so that gives us flexibility. The way I host Amplifier through WFAE, the Charlotte NPR station, is different than how Southbound, which is another podcast I help produce at WFAE, hosted by Tommy Tomlinson, how he does his show. I mean, he has a different tone. He has a different way of asking questions, of engaging the guest. And that's very different from the true crime podcast we produce at the station, She Says.
Yes.
So the way we approach it on an individual show basis is, what is the tone in relation to what the audience is going to be? What are the needs of the audience? Because a true crime podcast is going to have a totally different audience than a music interview show. They may overlap in some ways, but I wouldn't say that it's the exact same audience. And so by it being a true crime podcast, it needs to be compelling. There needs to be a lot of sound, a lot of movement. It needs to keep you to your seat for it to be a 30, 40-minute episode, because you have so many things going on in your life. Why is it going to compel you to listen for 40 minutes at a time when your attention span's maybe a few minutes, 10 minutes,
Sure.
Commute time is about 10, 20 minutes. So those are the considerations we take in when producing shows is, is our target audience one that's going to have less time in their schedule to listen or more time? Are they ones that are going to need more of a conversation or, are more of a tone that we can relate to them and how we produce it? But to your point, the NPR podcasts that are actually produced in DC are different because they produce theirs their way. And here in Charlotte or at any NPR station around the country, it's kind of just so long as you meet the code of ethics of how you produce a show and you're not, slandering or you're not creating a toxic environment.
Sure.
It's really up to you.
So Joni, I'm going to change the subject on you again. Talking about guests.
Yeah.
I have had some interesting guests on, and I don't even mean like when the interview's done, like you probably know as much as I do. When the interview comes out, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's going to sound good. We are there to make our guests sound good. But I can definitely say I've had to do some editing in my podcasts to make those guests sound good, because some of them are tough to get answers from. I've had people who give one-word answers, and you have to kind of coax them to get them to talk. Yeah. Or I've had people who talk too much, and they will just go on and on and on, and you're like, how the heck am I going to edit this? Yeah.
It happens. A musician could pitch their stuff, and they could have amazing music or amazing backstory, but they may be very quiet. They may not want to actually talk about it, or they don't know how to talk about it, or they get, I wouldn't say stage shock, or they're shy of the camera, but they got a microphone and they kind of just blink because it's just not natural for them to be on.
Well, some musicians are introverts.
Yeah, they very much are.
And they are not used to talking about themselves. They
let the music
do talk.
They let the music do it for it. Yeah, and so it happens. But then to your point though, you also have the people that you give them a microphone, they will talk on it the entire day. You don't need to prompt them. They will take you on the journey with them. You don't need to steer. When I go into these interviews, I always tell them, look, we're going to have an hour-long conversation. Just you and me. It's going to go through your music. We're going to talk about this. But I want you to know up front that this hour-long conversation we are editing it down because the listener is, the listenership that we see for Amplifier is one where they have about 20 to 30 minutes that they can spend on this episode. And that's it. And so we want to make the most of their time. So an hour-long interview where I'm talking with you, we're going to get the best conversation in.
Right.
But that means that some things are not going to make the cut. Little backstories, little jokes. So that kind of loosens them up to let them know, like, look, you're going to be fine. You're going to sound great. And we have a great track record of all the other interviews we've done in the past. But just know that, this is a special conversation because I get to hear everything, but not all the audience will.
Yeah. You're generally 20, 30 minutes, you say?
Yeah.
So I'll try to run at least 45. And occasionally, there have been one or two interviews where I've gone an hour.
Yeah.
But they're rare. Because, you talk to people and there's a lot of editing goes on that people don't realize.
Yep.
I don't think.
Very much so.
They may, as we talked before, they may go on longer. The story doesn't connect, or there's too much to the story and you only want to, hey, this is great. I don't need to know about everybody, you met right in between. I need this.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to work. And that's what's interesting about being an interviewer is that, and even an editor in that sense, you need to figure that out. What is going to make this interesting? What is somebody going to want to hear? And what is going to make the interviewee sound good?
Yep. What's going to make them shine? If there's a topic or as you're having this conversation, the way I describe it to folks I'm sharing podcast tips with is that when I'm interviewing someone, I am editing the interview in my head as I'm talking to them. I am making little reference points in my head of, okay, that was a really great question and a good answer there. The one that we just did a moment ago actually wasn't that great. I'm going to have to pivot.
Yeah.
Maybe don't talk about that as much in future questions. Maybe go in a different direction because of their passion or interest on it. And so by doing that in my head, I'm keeping track of what are the things I can take away in the editing session later on, or what are things I can really lean more into because clearly this person wants to talk about it more.
Yeah.
And that takes time to be able to have that mindset. And that takes, you recording multiple interviews and learning what your pros are as a host and your ability to be in a room with a guest or multiple guests.
Yeah.
And also having a great producer team. If you happen to have a co-producer or someone helping you with editing, that does make a difference.
It does.
But sometimes it's usually like what we're seeing here. It is a one-person operation, and we do the best we can.
Yeah. And I think the products come out pretty good.
I think so, too.
There's a lot of stuff out there that I've heard that I mentioned earlier. This podcast I used to listen to. I think if you're doing it, you need to have some kind of standard for yourself.
Yeah.
At least today, maybe 5-6 years ago, you could get away with just doing it on an iPhone, and that might cut it. But today, there has to be some kind of standard because a lot of the podcasts out there sound professional. Mm-hmm. Like, even if they're not working in a studio like you are for NPR, you might be working in your home studio. And I have to say, no, it's got to sound like this. Otherwise, I can't put that out. This interview has to sound like this. Otherwise, I'm not going to put that out.
Yeah. The thing is, we all walk before we run.
Yeah.
And so having those little mile markers, those standards of this is what I'm doing this month, and this is what I can grow into the next time. And that way you're tracking your success and your progress. And that way you know where the finish line is. Yeah. Or that, in the future where that finish line is going to be.
So we're going to change gears a little bit. We've been talking about all these things that have to do with podcasting. Mm-hmm. And you have led the first Charlotte Podcast Festival. Can you tell me about how that came about?
Yeah.
And what it is all about?
Oh, sure. And I have to give a major shout out to our co-collaborators on the festival, Queen City Podcast Network, Eclex Creative Agency, and the Blumenthal Performing Arts, who've worked with WFAE on this fest. But yeah, the Charlotte Podcast Festival is the city's first podcast festival. It's the state of North Carolina's first podcast festival. It's one of the first in the public media ecosystem in that when we did it last year, October of 2020, it was the first of its kind to be entirely free, entirely open to the public, no matter where you were in Charlotte, around the world, and entirely virtual. Anyone could have attended and learned from sessions. And the whole mission of it was to be able to activate the Charlotte area and say, look, you have a story to tell. And you may not have the training. You may not have the knowledge about equipment or how to edit or how to be a good host or a guest or marketing. We have people in the Charlotte area that are award-winning podcasters and audio storytellers. We're having them teach these sessions, lead these sessions for you to become inspired and learn from them. And you can do the same and become a podcaster in your own right. And so we did that in October of 2020. Originally it was supposed to be in person, but as you can tell with the pandemic, we had to make major pivots like a lot of people and organizations. We did it entirely online, and we had 14,000 global registrations. People from China to Australia to Los Angeles. We had people from the LA Times attending, people from CNN that were all learning from more than 60 speakers that were from this region, that were from the state.
Wow.
That could speak to what it was like to be a podcaster and share their knowledge with everyone. And it was so great. There are some people even that were so inspired by the Charlotte creative community from the speakers that these attendees actually physically traveled to Charlotte for the first time to visit the city.
Wow.
Because they're like, wow, Charlotte seems like a great place. I never thought of Charlotte that could have this like audio storytelling community. So after the success of last year's festival, we went ahead and thought, okay, 2021, what are we going to do? So again, WFAE in collaboration with Blumenthal Performing Arts, Queen City Podcast Network, and Eclex Creative Agency, all based here in Charlotte. So we're coming again together to do it again for 2021. We're going to have the Charlotte Podcast Festival take place in person, September 20th through the 25th. It's going to be in Uptown Charlotte at Spirit Square. We are utilizing the entire building from the McGlowan Theater to the gallery spaces. And we are going to be doing this in person. So people are able to come to Charlotte, to come to Uptown, to come into that building and meet these podcasters, these speakers in person and learn from them. There'll also be streaming elements. So if you don't feel comfortable yet meeting other people in person, that's fine. We can have our global attendees watch and listen from afar. And we are, I was going to say, not just sharing the educational components of how to become a podcaster, how to edit shows, how to become a marketer, all those subjects. We're also having live events in the evenings. So we're having award-winning, chart-topping podcasts that are going to be live on stage. For people who may not want to make a podcast, but they love these shows, they're able to be in the audience. So we have Jad Abumrad, who's the host of Radio Lab and Dolly Parton's America. He's going to be here on Saturday, September 25th. We have The Black Guy Who Tips, which is a Charlotte-based podcast that was acquired by Spotify in the past year.
Wow.
They are going to have a live show that week as well for Charlotte Podcast Festival. And we're announcing other ones in the near future. So all that to say, if anyone missed out on last year's sessions, but they want to watch them for free, or they want to learn about this year's festival, they can go to charlottepodcastfestival.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I know when the Shout Festival came out, I went and did a Queen City Music Podcast live with Eric Levasser from Records on the Wall was my guest at that point. So he came out and we did it live. It's a unique feeling if you've never done a live podcast before.
Yes, it is.
In front of an audience but it's a good time.
It's an energy. It's a certain energy, and being able to see people react to you live, because in the majority of cases, interviews that you do for your show or mine, they are in closed spaces.
Yes.
There's no audience. It's just us and the guest,
Yeah. maybe
the PR person on occasion, but that's it. And so for us to be able to be out there in public and for people to see and be inspired by, the microphone equipment or, being able to see the conversations live and feeding off that energy is really cool. So, and also it's a way to just, again, shine a light on Charlotte Podcast.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you've seen podcasting, not just the music scene grow in Charlotte, but also the podcast scene. I absolutely agree. When I first moved here, I made a database of the podcasts that were in the area. Of course, Queen City Music Podcast was on it, but, it was a small list.
Yeah.
Since that time, since about 4 years ago, I've continued to add to the list. There are more than 100. I'd say a few hundred podcasts. Wow. The ones that I can find, the ones I'm seeing getting out there, doing live events in the community or virtual events given the pandemic. But there are a number of podcasters, people who work in audio in Charlotte in the area. And so this podcast festival is a way to say, hey, we're not New York. We're not LA.
Right.
We're not where Joe Rogan or President Barack Obama do their podcasts.
Yeah.
But Charlotte is emerging. We have podcast studios here in the city that you can rent out by the hour. Yeah. The Charlotte Mecklenburg Library has podcast equipment that you can actually check out. So the festival is a way to say, hey, we got really talented folks here. Let's be able to give them the stage and the microphone. They can show their stuff.
It's a growing city. I mean, that's the one thing I loved about moving to Charlotte. I got here in 2006.
Yeah.
Is just seeing how much it has grown. I mean, even when I got here, musically, right? You couldn't go to that many bars and restaurants and see that much music. And now there's
Every brewery.
Every
Yep.
brewery's got tons of, they've got live music, a lot of bars, a lot of restaurants. There's music on, outdoor venues like the Promenade. There's music at, Birkdale Village. I mean, it's just everywhere now, which is just wonderful for the city and the scene. And it's great to hear that there's a lot more podcasters out here. Maybe I'll try to you're my first podcaster on this podcast.
I'm honored.
So,
although I would say you may want to look at your alumni list because just as we mentioned, celebrities and musicians, they tend to get back into podcasting. Courtney Lynn and Quinn are musicians that now have their own music podcast.
Wow.
So it's interesting to see people now turn to podcasting as a medium to share their story more and more. So yeah. I absolutely love to see the podcast scene grow. I love seeing the music scene grow. Charlotte creative communities. There's just a lot going on in all different parts.
Hey, as we start to wrap things up, Joni, how do folks get in touch with you if they want to, if they're interested in Amplifier or they're more interested and they want to find out about your background? If we didn't cover it all here today.
I don't think we covered it all. I think we missed out. I love dogs. That's the other thing you should put in there.
It's a new podcast for you.
Oh, you don't even know how I want that to happen. No, absolutely. And I will say that I am the kind of person that's an open book. If someone has a question, there have been times where musicians have reached out saying, hey, I don't want to be featured on Amplifier. Can you just let me know, like, where else should I pitch to? Or like, who else should I get in touch with for like music coverage? Or can you look at my press release? Always happy to help as much as I can. So, I'm happy for them to reach out to me over social media. You can find me Joni Deutsch on Facebook or LinkedIn, on Twitter and Instagram at A Change of Tune, which was my first public radio program. You also can email me, jdeutsch@wfae.org. And in terms of Charlotte Podcast Festival stuff too, we are always open and welcome to any kind of podcaster in the area. So if you want to reach out, let me know that you're doing a podcast. I'd love to be able to include you in the mix.
Get on that list.
Yeah, because it is growing. And if you're thinking about getting into podcasting now, this is the time to do it.
And get down to the Charlotte Podcast Festival.
Yeah, and especially since it's free. And that's a big thing. Barrier to access, podcast movement I mentioned earlier.
Yep.
It is an amazing way to network with a global community of podcasters. It's also expensive. It's a conference.
Right.
This Charlotte Podcast Festival is accessible. It's one where you can do it entirely for free. You show up for free in person or you watch it for free online. And that way, if people want to get in, but they don't really want to invest a few $100s in it right now, this is kind of baby steps.
And if you live in the area, it's local.
Yes.
That's what makes it the best.
That's what makes it the best and also different from a lot of other conferences and festivals and events out there. We are making sure that this is made in CLT in all ways.
That sounds awesome. Well, Joni, it's been my pleasure having you today. I thank you for coming out, and we will be hearing more from you. If you want to listen, make sure you go check out Amplifier and find out more about Joni.
Thank you, Matthew.
Have a great day. And as episode 48 of the Queen City Music Podcast comes to a close, I have a bit of bad news for you. The Charlotte Podcast Festival that Joni had spoken about is being postponed until 2022 because of the recent surge of COVID. Make sure to visit charlottepodcastfestival.com for more information. As always, if you have an idea for an episode or would like to be a guest on the QCMP, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out our local partners, Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com. Reporting from 20XX at reportingfrom20xx.wordpress.com and Queen City Live at Instagram.com/Queen City Live Music. Until next month, be well and stay safe.